Welcome to our review of Fire in the Sky, the notorious alien abduction film from the 1990s. One of us had never seen it before, and we're going to go in depth into casting, story, and of course the insane sequence that everyone talks about. Hope you enjoy it, guys. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me today is Tara.
Greetings, citizens.
I said that like it's not always you, it is always you, but
surprise, Tara.
Shaking up the phrasing a little bit. This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together and we talk about a film. It is 90s alien season, and we are kicking off that season with Fire in the Sky, which is a film that I have never seen before until now. Whereas Tara saw it like once on cable when she was like 9 and is returning to it now after all this time.
Yeah.
After those eons have passed between when you were 9 and now.
You know, there's something very freeing about just admitting what my age is. Although it came out in 93, so I would have been 8.
Okay.
But I think I watched it on cable when I was 9. Yeah. That checks out.
Yeah, I'm not into many extreme sports, but joking about your age is one that I dabble in from time to time. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Let's say we talk about the film. We'll start spoiler free. We'll give you a warning before we go into the spoilers. It's an alien abduction movie about someone who does seemingly get abducted, and the friends and co-workers that he's with who then have to kind of trying to explain to everyone why this guy went missing, and they're effectively looked at like they might have murdered someone, and that's why he's not around anymore, and sort of poking in at the belief and disbelief at their story and whether or not they're telling the truth or not. And it stars Robert Patrick, T-1000 himself, in a lead role where he has it looks like Daryl from Walking Dead. That's just
He really does.
just call it what it is.
I never realized they look so much alike.
He's got his sort of look going, and then we have not a lot of people you'd recognise. Obviously, the other sort of kind of famous person in this is Elliot from E.T., who is like, I don't know, 18 to 20 in this.
And Peter Berg.
Oh yeah, the director of Patriots Day is in this as an actor. Well, he's an actor in this. He's not in this playing an actor. That came out weird. But
Yes.
But what I'm saying is I didn't realize.
He's an actor turned director.
Yeah. I didn't realize he was an actor, that director, so that was a surprise to me when I saw his name and clicked on it and went, oh, it is the director, went on to make a bunch of 6s out of 10s. So, welcome.
Patriots Day is amazing.
So
We'll have to watch Battleship one day. Maybe during our 2010s Alien month.
Well, when we get to like Covenant and Prometheus, we'll do a 2010s Alien season.
Yeah.
This was the first time for me, and I will say before we give our general thoughts on the film that I have heard of this a few times. Like, it's been brought up in different podcasts that I've listened to. I've heard people talk about it, and I've heard people say it traumatized them as a kid. And I feel like it's because a lot of people who are around our age or in a similar age to us grew up in the 90s, and this was probably something that played on cable in the 90s a lot, so you probably something a lot of people caught at some point in that time period. I somehow didn't. Somehow I just missed it. Maybe I'm just slightly younger and that's why, but I never did. But I'd heard there's a sequence in this that traumatized people as kids, so I went into this going wondering if it was a little too hyped up, that maybe I was going to see whatever this scene was and I'll not recognize it and think, that's a fun scene, but it's not necessarily hitting me that way, or if it was going to be something I immediately go, oh yeah, I can see why this freaked people out and it's kind of impressive and sort of take. So we'll find out in a minute how I did feel, but I'm going to ask Tara first, because I always ask Tara to say this first. What did you think of Fire in the Sky?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say that I was traumatized by it when I was a kid, but I absolutely remember the scene vividly. I mean, I'm sure I've only watched this movie once, and nothing about the movie seemed new when I was watching it. Like, every line I knew, every moment I knew. It was pretty remarkable, actually, for me to. So obviously the film had quite an impact on me when I was a kid, but not traumatic to the point where like I couldn't sleep at night. Maybe like the first night or something.
Also, worth mentioning here while we're in the spoiler-free section is that the scene in question, assuming I've got the right one, which I think I do, is definitely heavily in spoiler territory, so we won't really talk about what it is until later, but...
I definitely still love that scene. Like, it is good. It's a good scene. Unfortunately, it's like 10 minutes, and the rest of the movie is, I wouldn't say boring, but just not what you're expecting, I guess. I think this might be the only science fiction movie that we ever do that's based on a true story, because generally those genres don't go together.
Well, based on an alleged true story. Maybe
Alleged true
the
story,
accurate
exactly.
statement. Yeah, no, that's true.
Hilarious.
I don't think we've ever done one before. This is the first time I've ever watched a sci-fi movie on here that's based on a true story.
I'm certain it's going to be the only time. In any case, I do like the movie. I think the movie is good. I think the stuff at the beginning and the stuff at the end are definitely the reason to watch the film. Not that I hate the stuff in the middle. It's just not very exciting.
The type of story this is doing, it's kind of the quintessential movie that's just about your standard alien abduction, which is someone's beamed up to a ship, seemingly, and then all the mystery around what happened to them kind of spreads throughout the small town and that. Like, obviously that's what a lot of X-Files is about, and there's definitely other movies that touch on it.
You know, I think that's why this movie was very traumatic for kids in the 90s also. It's just because of aliens were kind of like the hot topic of the 90s. There's just a lot of alien shows like that, and even like Unsolved Mysteries were like was a really popular show where they just reenact stories that people told and crimes and investigations that never led to anything, but there was always like, what happened? There's this mysterious supernatural thing was involved or something. I don't know. I think it's just, you know, the flavor of the 90s is just alien abduction. So if you're always surrounding that, and then you have this movie that, you know, can be, you know, this is the boogeyman that you're afraid of, I think just kind of reinforces that fear.
Yeah, I think the point I'm getting at is that I don't think I've seen a movie that is just straight up this story. I've seen movies where there's a bit of an alien abduction part of it, or it's part of the backstory, or it's something.
God told me to.
Part of something in the movie. But this is like, no, this is just what it is. It's the story about an alien abduction like this happening. And that was kind of neat, I think, for me, just as I realised that that's what this was. It is just kind of taking that on its own and making a movie about that, as opposed to it just being a small fragment in a larger narrative that's doing lots of wacky things. Because normally, when you have like Independence Day, which we brought up like last time we talked about a movie, I think, but Independence Day has like an element of that where one of the characters says he was abducted by aliens, and there's jokes about anal probes, and he gets his revenge kind of by the end of the movie. That's in there, and
it was during the Discovery review.
And it's played for laughs, and it's played for all these things, and it turns out to be true. And I guess because of that, because that Independence Day is definitely a movie I saw as a kid. I don't know if I saw it in the cinema.
Also a 90s film, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I saw it in the cinema, but I definitely saw it like a lot after when it came to video, and that was very much, I think, kind of my first exposure to that type of story. So I think inherently for me, my entire life, I hear someone's abducted by aliens, and probably because Men in Black, also Will Smith, funnily enough, but Men in Black was right after Independence Day, so a year later, and that also had all the crappy magazines saying, Elvis abducted me into a spaceship and I had his baby, and things like that on the magazine covers.
The Weekly World News.
Yeah, all that.
Yeah, what you're thinking of.
Yeah, all that nonsense. So it was kind of interesting to sit down and watch a movie which it tries to treat this like a very serious, like horrific experience that's scary.
Yeah.
The mystery around it and the skepticism around it, and one of the core parts of the movie, that middle part that you were kind of referring to, when it is just the guys in town and everyone's not really believing what they went through, is that it kind of deals with this idea that they're all just kind of assuming that this group of guys might have murdered someone, and they're all treating them, they're all ostracized, they're all being treated like they're guilty of something, and it's them dealing with those accusations and the looks they're getting and that kind of stuff. And I thought that part was actually kind of interesting. But that said, I do kind of agree the highlights of the movie are like there's like a 15-20 minute stretch towards the end, and there's like maybe like a 10-minute chunk near the start, which are easily the two highlights of the film, and it's probably the scenes that people remember the most from this. Those are very good, particularly the one towards the end. The one towards the end is really well shot and is really unique, and is surprising based on what the rest of the movie is, how deep it goes into what it's doing. And I think one thing that sticks out to me is that the movie's not perfect at what it's doing before that. The movie, when it's doing all this stuff with the characters and the mystery, and we're never going to have answers and all that, you can do good movies that are completely ambiguous, and you deal with the psychology of it. This movie is decent at that, it's not great at that. And as I was watching that first like half or so, even deep into like the end of the second third, I was kind of thinking to myself, oh, this is not bad, I'm kind of enjoying this, it definitely feels a bit 90s, and it definitely feels this or this. I think what happens and what you see in the last third of the movie, I think had those first 2/3 been like the perfect, like expertly written psychological film about dealing with the trauma and the mystery of the unknown, I might have been disappointed with that last third, because it went to like, oh, we're just going to show you some stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think because this film didn't quite get there with the other stuff, it doing this other thing in the last third actually is what puts it over the line into, you know what, this was actually quite good and worth watching, because it filled a void with something else rather than doing the first thing perfect. And I know that's like a really weird thing to say, but if the first 2/3 were perfect at the intrigue, then I think I would have been disappointed with just how, I don't want to call it answers, but just how explicit some things get towards the end. But because it was, you know, it was like a B in how it was handling everything up until that point, that when it just showed me some really cool stuff towards the end, I was like, oh, you know what, that just elevated the whole thing. All of a sudden, this movie is about getting to this. This movie's about finally seeing this, and I had a good time because of that. So
excellent. I'm glad you like it.
I do. I like the movie.
Because like you said, like this is one that people talk about due to trauma and probably have hyped it up for you. So,
and I'm not traumatized, I will say that, but
no, you're an adult.
But I knew what scene it was, although there was definitely some moments early on, like, because the actual abduction that happens quite early on that you see, I was sort of watching that going, is this what traumatized people? And I was sort of like questioning, like, was that it? Because a bunch of pussies in the 90s, like what were all these kids thinking? This isn't that bad.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, that did frighten me when I was a kid, but not quite to the extent. But oh crap, I had a point, but it's gone. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Yeah. So I mean, it was you know, watching it and kind of like being excited because it had all this buzz from, you know, not buzz in the same way that a new movie has buzz where everyone's talking about it, but just buzz that I've heard a bit here and a bit there and just a bit from all over the place over the years. That I was excited but nervous that it wasn't going to live up to it. And
I wonder if part of the reason that I don't love the middle part as much is because it claims to be based on a true story, which automatically makes my brain go, well, then they all must be murderers. Although, I guess the ending changes that. But at the same time, like when I'm watching it, I'm like, so did they just beat up a guy or something? Like, why did he go missing? You know, if you think, it's kind of like the Conjuring movies. If you think about it from not so much as just standalone movies of their own, but actually based on real events. You know, they're con artists. So you don't really like the Warrens. And people might have actually hurt their families, you know, in a real situation. So like, because they weren't take possessed or something. So, you know, it kind of like, they're great movies when they're on their own, but if you remember that they're true stories or based on something true, then it kind of just makes it, I don't know, it kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth.
I think you just separate it. I think, you know, when it comes to stuff like The Conjuring, I'm like, okay, a table moved an inch, right? That's what the true story was. And they've written this like supernatural story. Yeah, the Warrens are really likable in those movies, and the real Warrens are probably a lot shadier and probably aren't that likable. And that's okay. I can separate that in my mind. The only thing out of the Conjuring movies that left a little bit of a bad taste is in the third one. there's a real person did die, and the story kind of revolves around this real person who died. And
it's a trial, right?
Yeah.
Also.
And I felt a little bit weird. It's like, no, someone did actually kill someone in the real world, and that's kind of what this is based on. With this, it's very easy for me to separate, because I'll be honest, I'd forgotten this was supposed to be based on a true story. It wasn't until the ending where, you know, at the end of True Stories where the text comes up saying, and then 2 years later, you know, so-and-so did this. It starts doing that. I'm like, oh yeah, this is meant to be based on a true story. So I wasn't thinking that at all throughout the whole movie. And honestly, I think anyone who watches it should just watch it under that. Like, just, yeah, someone told some stories, and maybe that's what they've based the movie on. Take it as fiction, enjoy it as fiction, don't think about the real people.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
That's my stance on it. Yeah, if I'm not made it really clear, I mean, the movie kind of revolves around a bunch of is lumberjack the right term for this? Or is it just loggers or something? Like, what's just the... Tree surgeons.
I don't really know.
Tree surgeons. I'm sure I've heard that term. But yeah, they're cutting down trees. They're going out with chainsaws and they're cutting down trees. Whatever specific term fits that. That's what they are.
Yeah, they've been hired to clear cut some forest.
And the movie plays with structure a little bit. You know, it starts off with the truck like driving down in a hurry to the diner. This is them returning from this night where a lot of this stuff happened. And part of me was thinking that the whole thing was going to be bookended with them telling a story, sitting there talking to the police officers and the guy from whatever agency he came from. Like it wasn't the FBI, but it was something like that. This guy comes in to talk to them, and I was thinking, oh, maybe this the whole thing will be bookended, but actually their story is done in like 15-20 minutes, and then the movie progresses from after this meeting. And I was thinking about that as I was watching it, but it's actually quite smart in a way, because the whole idea of this movie is that everyone in this town hears this as a story, when, you know, in hindsight from them. So it kind of makes sense that we as the audience also kind of encounter them after it's already happened, and then we hear it told through that perspective of them talking about it. As this is the story of that day, that night. This is what happened. That makes some sense. Admittedly, it's a very explicit story. It doesn't really hide anything. You know, like part of me was thinking we were going to find out later part of it was a lie, and we would see what really happened for that part of the story or something like that. And they never did
plus
that.
When they all sit down, I think it's like Peter Berg or maybe it's Robert Patrick who says like, okay, we're all going to stick to the story, right? So it's like, oh, are they lying? Like what? It kind of sets up a little bit of like, should I trust this story they tell?
And there's even a detail later where we find out they did leave out a part where there was like a bit of a real fight between Dallas is the guy who doesn't like Travis, because Travis is the one who is abducted, and Dallas doesn't like him, and they're sort of, when we see like in the flashback that they are kind of butting heads a lot.
Yeah, but we don't actually see them fight.
No, we never see them fight, but it sets up that they don't like each other very much, and then later on they do. Dallas eventually admits that a cut that he has in his hand is from an altercation with him. So it's like, oh,
it happened that night.
There's a part missing of this story, but then they never actually go back to it. So that is a little bit strange from a storyteller. It reeks of deleted scene. Honestly, it really does feel like a deleted scene.
Or it could be intentional, just because this is based on a true story. So it could be there to leave some doubt when you watch the movie. Like, well, they didn't tell us about this part while we were watching the scene, so maybe it didn't happen. Or maybe not everything they said was true.
I feel like enough of it's explicit enough that it doesn't really feel like they're planting enough doubt. I don't think it's ambiguous in I think the movie's pretty,
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you could say a lot of something's just in someone's head, but...
yeah, the guy who wrote the book is Travis. Like, he's the one who wrote the book. Just, so you know.
I thought you were going to make another point. That's why.
Well, I mean, it's just, Travis is the one who gets abducted. He is the one who wrote the book. So it's not coming from the people who are telling the story in this movie, which is just an interesting point of view thing.
Oh, that's okay. Sure. Yeah. Like it's the one who is claiming to have been abducted, who is actually recounting the events, and I presume changing things a little bit. I mean, did he write it as like a narrative, or did he write it as just a factual, this is what happened?
I'm not sure. I think he just like sort of got famous for his story and just decided to write it down and made money off of it. I'm not really sure how it accounts his story.
I can't blame him for that. Like,
I know that the film isn't accurate to the book. Like they take some dramatic liberties when we get to like the final scene.
Yeah,
to make it more spooky.
Which doesn't surprise me, and honestly, I'm all for it. Like,
oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, so
it's worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, do it. It's just fine. So yeah, and and like I was saying earlier, like I mentioned that it's kind of like a B tier, like sort of in quality for a lot of it. And what I mean by that is that there's some ropey acting here or there. There's definitely some minor characters who really stuck out as being kind of iffy, like
the church scene.
Yeah, there's a town meeting in the church where pretty much everyone who speaks up and asks a question are all really bad actors.
They're terrible.
They're all pretty rough.
I wish they got the guys from Parks and Rec who have the the like zoning committee meetings.
Because I think Robert Patrick is decent enough. Mm-hmm. And I think he's an actor, much like Arnold in a lot of ways, actually, who got to really play above his standard in Terminator 2, because he was given a role where he doesn't really have to speak that much, and he gets to be this great villain in this like all-timer movie. Then he's a pretty decent B-movie actor, and that's kind of his level that he's been at ever since, and that's okay. That's what he is, and that's fine. He's in the From Dusk Till Dawn sequel, and he's in other random things, and I see him on posters for.
I want to say he was in the HBO series Perry Mason.
Oh sure, yeah, and I see him on like random posters for like straight to video action and horror movies all the time. It's just,
he's a working actor.
He's one of those guys,
Good for him.
He keeps working. That's what he does. He's the villain in I think it's the Double Dragon movie, which was based on the video game. It's maybe terrible, but he's like the villain in that.
Did you ever try to run like he does in Terminator 2, thinking it might make you run faster?
I don't know if I thought it'd make me run faster, but I definitely tried to emulate it at some point.
Yeah. I remember in school, like in PE class, after that movie came out, everyone tried running like that.
It's funny to me that we spoke for like 2 hours in Terminator 2 when we did that movie, and we're still finding new things to say about it all these episodes later.
It's a classic.
Yeah, but hey, Robert Patrick. I mean, he's the T-1000. It's impossible not to bring up that movie.
It's like one of the most iconic villains next to the Terminator, probably.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how. Maybe we'll have to do a top 20 villains or something at some point. But yeah, he's ranking somewhere.
That's a good idea.
Spoilers then. Let's go full spoilers from this point on for Fire in the Sky. You have been warned.
Yes.
All right, let's talk about the scene.
Okay.
I mean, let's be honest.
Just jump to the end.
We're all here for the scene because the big thing plot-wise, just to sort of establish where we are in the story here, is that Travis has been gone. People suspect his friends of killing him, even though Robert Patrick's his best friend. In fact, he's even in love with Robert Patrick's sister and wants to marry her. So they're all like
They're very close. It seems like a small town, community.
So it's all like that, and then out of nowhere, there's a phone call at Robert Patrick's house, and there's actually been several phone calls, but he's not heard any of them because he's been living away in the motel because he's having some rough patches with the wife, partly because he's accused of being a murderer, and they're struggling to do all that. But he happens to be there in this phone call, and the wife just thinks it's some prank calls because he's becoming it's kind of gotten around town that her husband might have killed someone. And he answers the phone, and because it's him answering it and not her for the first time, he hears what sounds like Travis. And it's one of those things where it's really predictable. Like I was like, oh, he's going to hear it's going to be Travis. This is like somehow this is how he comes back into the movie. And sure enough, they go looking for him, and he is butt-ass naked at a petrol station. He is in the rain. He's scared to look at anyone. He's clearly traumatized by whatever he's been through.
Fantastic acting, I think. Like the moment where like someone tries to touch him and he just like does that shriek, where it's so like it's like an animal that's been tortured or something, like any kind of touch is just, it's inhuman almost. It was really great.
And part of what makes this so effective is that in the first part of the movie, when they're telling the story of the day, and our introduction to Travis is that he's upbeat, he has these hopes and dreams. Robert Patrick's the moody one. He's the one who's trying to cheer him up. And when he goes to say hi to his possible wife / Robert Patrick's sister, he doesn't go through the door. It's almost like a little joke bit where he always climbs up on top of the little roof and goes up to her window. And like Robert Patrick's wife's, oh, do you have to do it that way? And she's getting frustrated at him. But it's kind of cute. We see that he has this zest for life. He's kind of like a big kid. He is the hopeful, happy one who has all these dreams and ideas. and then you see him like this, and he is this scared husk of a person, and it's like, it's really effective because it's so different from what he was at the start of the movie, and it really sells it.
He's got weird bruises on his face. Like they're not bruises someone gets in a fight. You know, they're bruises like very specific on both sides of his face, like the sides of his eyes and stuff.
Symmetrical.
Yeah, it's very symmetrical bruising. That's very strange.
Yeah. So this leads to him being kind of weird with Robert Patrick, and eventually he's taken home, and there's something that triggers the memories, and for the movie's sake, it sort of transitions from this trigger into this flashback scene of him being abducted. You know what happened when he was abducted, and then at the end of this big sequence we're about to talk about, is it sort of transitions into as if he's been in hypnotherapy or something at therapy, and he's like told this story, but it transitions into it really nicely. It's if he gets scared, he's heading under the table in the kitchen. Because his future wife and friends thought it'd be a good idea to surround him by people when he's clearly like nervous and uneasy about everything.
Yeah, he just needs to be in a safe place alone.
Yeah, read the room, guys. Read the room. But it's like there's some syrup or honey or something on the table, and it starts.
Maple syrup.
Yeah, it starts dripping down the side of and it hits him in the face, and that's what triggers him. Because then he wakes up. It's almost like the Matrix scene where Neo wakes up in the pod, where he wakes up in kind of like a fleshy sack.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Matrix like remembered this scene. And
sure.
Like, let's do something like that.
But he wakes up, and he's got his clothes on still, but he wakes up in this sack, and he started looking around. It's gooey, it's slimy, and that's why the maple syrup's kind of making him think of it. He sort of pokes out of like this sort of, there's like a one side of it's like a sort of thin layer of flesh that he kind of pokes
like
through.
a latex.
Yeah.
But there's definitely like some sort of techie thing. It's very subtle in the latex that looks artificial. So the whole thing looks very, you know, like I don't know, like biomaterial. You know, even the whatever he's laying in is like this goo that looks kind of like mud. There's even something that looks kind of like worms in it, but they're not moving or anything like that. But then there's these lines in the, you know, cocoon, for lack of a better term, that look very much like a circuit board. So it's some sort of like a biotech thing. So it's a subtle detail that's there that I really liked.
Yeah, and it makes sense for what you see in a little bit as well. But he pokes his way out, and it's, you know, like a big chamber that has tons of these slots in the wall that he's just came out of. But what I kind of like about the design of this is that they're not all identical. They're kind of like rough and like mismatched. It's almost like someone's like, put down this grid, but it's kind of like a loose clay thing where they've not intentionally out of their way to make it all match perfectly. It does feel kind of haphazard, and some of them look like they're kind of half empty or broken or don't work anymore. When he does kind of go out, and there's no gravity, so he's kind of floating around eventually. And
Which looks great too.
And he sticks his hands into one of the other pods. You know, there's like a half of a person, like who's missing like their bottom half of their body. It's their torso.
Just rotted. Yeah.
Yeah. And obviously this freaks him out. And this is all very dark and sinister. It's got a very specific mood and vibe. It's all
terrifying.
It's all kind of like existential, and like he's alone. He's been taken by a force that he can't possibly comprehend, and it's this foreboding and just completely overwhelming sense. You know, it's a nightmare. So, and he floats around, and you know, this does take a bit of time, but like it's all very moody. Every second of it's kind of engrossing because of that.
He's holding on to like this umbilical cord thing. Also, it's like he's holding on to it, but it still looks very organic, like much like the whatever latex thing that he's in.
Yeah, and he starts moving around, and he starts climbing up, and he eventually gets up to like an opening, and he looks over. And he freaks out because he thinks he sees aliens, right? Because we see some sort of what looks like classical looking aliens.
With the big eyes.
Yeah.
Big bug eyes.
But the interesting little twist here is that when he does sort of like build up a bit of courage and he goes in and he goes close, he realizes that these are actually suits. These aren't like the bodies of some being. These are the spacesuits that they effectively wear. Although, of course, it does the horror movie moment where one of them moves behind them. One of them is filled with an alien, and they capture him.
He's just chilling, I guess.
Yeah, and he gets dragged, you know, down alien hallways, gets put on an operating table, and this is the scene. It's all been very impressive and well shot up until this point, but the reason why this traumatizes people is once he's on the operating table. There's just a few specific details here that make this really particularly nasty from like a sensory overload perception. One is that they put like a sort of black gunk in his mouth, like it is either as like a sort of lubricant or an insulator or something, because they stick like a tube in his mouth afterwards. But it's like, shove this in his mouth first and then put this big tube in.
Not just a tube, it's like a metal like vice or clamp or something, and then they use like they're turning something into it, like a something that's threaded. That they have to crank into it to keep his mouth open. And well, the first thing they do is they lay him on this like slab, this concrete slab or metal slab, and then put this, it looks like, a blanket, like they've cut off all his clothes, so he's nude, he's cold, and they put this like blanket over him, and then this like mist comes down, and they're all looking up at the mist, like just looks like a regular mist, and then all of a sudden the blanket becomes like latex and it's vacuum sucking him down, and he's trapped now. It's not a comfort anymore.
on this
nightmare.
On this detail in particular, I actually didn't like it at first. See, when they put the sheet on top of him, I thought, that's just a regular white sheet. This looks really out of place in this alien set. Everything else has felt really distinct and alien, and like it's part of a different ecosystem and technology tree and all that sort of stuff. And this just looked like a bit of fabric, and I thought, that looks really cheap and tacky. Like, why would you just use this sheet? But it did turn out to be more interesting when it did suck in, and it's like, oh no, it's just reacting and it's doing stuff. Like it's actually got a purpose and it functions.
Now it's a nightmare.
Yeah. And they cut out a hole for the mouth where they put the tube and all that, and then they cut out a hole for one eye, and they put like a device into his eye.
It's like a Clockwork Orange thing, maybe slightly.
Yeah, but they start like putting like liquid in, or liquid starts coming out of his eye that's like
milk.
It's like a creamy color, yeah, and it's just really kind of nasty, and the whole thing feels like he can't move any part of his body. He's completely trapped. These beings, which we see clearly, by the way, at this point, where all their masks are off, and they're sort of the shape of a classic alien head, but they're more like a sort of like kind of Freddy Krueger flesh looking sort of skin tone.
I like the detail of like when you look at them straight on, it looks like they have a regular neck, but if they turn to profile, there's like a hole here, so it's like their neck's made of two separate parts holding up their head. I like that a lot. I thought that was a neat detail.
Yeah, I also like that they show no like empathy or remorse. This is a day at the office for them.
This is like probably what Foxy feels when I take her to the vet.
Yeah, they don't care. They don't care that he's scared. They don't care that he's in pain or terrified. And obviously
he can't breathe. Like they've put some kind of like thick goo in his mouth, so like his mouth is obstructed, so he's like struggling to breathe, and he's got his mouth clamped open like some sort of ancient dentist torture nightmare, and then his eyes clamped open, but it's being clouded, his vision's being clouded by whatever milky thing is going in, and then he is able to see clearly eventually, but only to see the next part,
which is a giant like drill or needles coming towards his eye, which is probably the most traumatic part. I think no one likes the thought of something coming into their eye. It's just
you can't blink. Your eyes just staying open like that.
Yeah,
the whole time.
That's pretty nasty. And then it's around here when he finally wakes up in the psychiatrist's office. Yeah, it's a very dense like 2 minutes of cinema, because it's just like there's so many details.
I think the whole thing's like 10 minutes, but like
from when he wakes up, sure, but I mean on the operating table, that is like 2 minutes. Like, because so much of it's a slow build of him climbing out and going into the other pod and then going up and seeing the spacesuits. The actual bit in the operating table is like a really, really dense 2 minutes of details. You've got this sheet, you've got the gunk they put in his mouth, you've got the tubing, you've got the eye clamp, you've got the drill or needle going into his eye, you've got the aliens themselves. There's so much in such a quick span of time. And this is what I was saying earlier when I was in the spoiler-free section, is that the movie is playing it's all a mystery. Do we believe them? Do we not? Will the authorities believe them? They take a lie detector test. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a bit. But all that stuff is going on, and had that all been like A+ stuff, I might have actually been disappointed that it sullied it by just showing us like straight up, here's a bunch of like proper science fiction like spaceship stuff. But because that was only just so good, this just like, okay, now this is the peak of the movie. Now this is where I'm being rewarded, and it's just really cool visuals. And it was like they said to themselves, obviously there's this traditional look of an alien that we all think of when you think of Area 51 with the big eyes and the little bodies and stuff. It was almost like they said, you know what, we want to do the one example in cinema where we take that seriously and make it something that is going to be not a joke, because it's really a joke when you see that design.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you think of like those alien conventions or whatever where people tell their UFO or their abduction story, it's easy to make fun of them and stuff, but like if it was real, it would be a nightmare like this.
Oh, it'd be terrifying.
It would be terrifying.
Yeah.
So I love that they just do that. Like it's so visceral, and like you said earlier, like every sense that you have, every sensory is being activated with the reflex of flee. Like this is bad. This is not where you want to be right now.
And I think it's partly because most of it is, other than the abduction itself, where you see the big light in the sky, the fire in the sky, and like there's a bit of fantastical stuff there to an extent. It's relatively limited. So because most of the movie is in this small town, it's people in rooms in cars, it's debating, it's all just ground, boots on the ground, realistic stuff in the sense that they're all just in normal locations. And then you have this 10-minute sequence that is completely alien. And it's almost like, it's one, obviously Alien's a great movie. Alien's a better movie than this, right? Don't think for a second I'm suggesting it's not. But obviously with Alien, you're already in a science fiction setting on a sci-fi spaceship. And yes, don't get me wrong, the H.R. Giger alien ship, when you see that compared to the Strome, was very different, and it's very organic versus the mechanical and all the rest of it. But because this is 70s small town, lumberjack country, it's it's diners where you get cups of coffee, it's old school trucks and things like that. And then you cut to he's floating in space surrounded by pods that have like half killed, or they're definitely, he's definitely dead. That guy he sees is definitely dead. But you know what I mean, like half decayed bodies and stuff. And obviously there's questions here that aren't answered. Like, well, clearly some of the people they abduct they just let die, and this guy they put
there's
back down.
There's also there's a moment where the aliens are dragging him through some sort of corridor, and it looks very it's almost like watching someone's colonoscopy video. Like it does look kind of organic, but there's like lights and stuff.
Oh sure. Actually, do you know what detail I love about that is they're not dragging him on the ground. He is actually floating, because there's still no gravity, so they're still just dragging him through the air.
You're right. Yeah. And but he's like running into books and like people's glasses and stuff. It's actually kind of a messy whatever ship they're using, because they just leave stuff around. So other people have gone through this throughout however long these aliens have been around abducting people. Yeah.
And what is their purpose? Who knows? The movie doesn't even try to get into that. It's okay. Don't worry about it. No. It's not a movie for that. That's okay.
Yeah. This
is about the horror of the abduction itself, not the why they're doing this. What is the species? What do they care about? We don't know. But I guess if I was to theorize, I would say the reason why he is sent back is because part of their experiment is maybe to actually monitor what happens to him after he goes back. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know. But they send him back, and
or maybe he escaped somehow. Like, yeah, because we don't get the whole story really. We just get up until the eyeball thing.
Yeah, I wonder if the reason the ones, maybe it's not so much that they intentionally kill some of them, but it's whatever they do, some people just don't survive it, or maybe the ones who are dead are the failed experiments, and this guy, Travis is just lucky enough that he was on a successful attempt. So
I like to think also that maybe the aliens really just don't care. So like maybe they're just forgotten about. Like we meant to drop them off, but like they don't mean anything to us, so they just forget about them.
Either that, or they don't care in the sense that he survived. Well, I'll just put him back then, because whatever.
Yeah.
We don't care. They're not even worried about the authorities or people of Earth finding out. Like, well, that's because they're just rightfully ignorant about what.
This is not the Federation learning first contact rules.
Oh no, not at all. But like, whether it's because they're just ignorant and don't care about humans finding out, and it just so happens that it's a myth, or they are smart enough to know that no one's going to believe this guy. Like, this would be like a myth to them, so it's just going to sound like a crazy story. Like, whether they know that or not is almost irrelevant, but either way it's working for them. So here we are. And and I think the one weird structural thing that's weird about the movie, though, from a writing perspective, that I do kind of have to nitpick at a little bit, is Robert Patrick's the main character of this film, right? He plays the lead. He's the best friend of Travis. He's the one who cares about him the most. He's the one who's kind of the leader of the little group, so when they're accusing them of things, he's the one who's like getting agitated about it. He's the one fighting back against it. And when Travis comes back, it is a little bit strange from a writing perspective that when he goes to speak to him, and Travis effectively says, "You left me there," and blames him for that, and Robert Patrick just gets a little bit pissed off at that and says, "Well, F you two then," and sort of storms away. He kind of just leaves the movie until the very end when Travis 2 years later goes back to see him, which, don't get me
Travis
wrong,
becomes the main character.
yeah, and don't get me wrong, I do think it's important that the ending had to be them reconciliating and some reconciliating you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Reconciliation.
Scene.
Yes.
Yeah.
They had to have a reconciliation between them, right? That was important that the movie had to end that way, because we started with their friendship, had to end with their friendship. That had to be the arc, because we can't answer all the alien questions, but we can answer this friendship. We can finish that. We can.
Yeah, that's smart.
Yeah, we can fix that. And it ends in honestly a funny little joke where they go out to where he was taken, and after like Robert Patrick finds out that Travis has had like a kid, he's got a second kid on the way, so he's going to be an uncle again, and they're sort of bonding and talking about, and they basically forgive each other for whatever they did that night. So he forgives Robert Patrick for driving away in fear, thinking he was dead, and Robert Patrick, you know, kind of says, you know, same to you, meaning, you know, whatever I said, whatever I get mad for at the time, like, let's just, you know, be gone with it. But there's a little joke at the end where he says, "I don't think they're coming back though. I don't think they like me very much," and that's kind of the joke the movie ends on. It's, you know, it's sweet. It's just this idea that after a couple of years he can finally maybe crack a little joke about it and just kind of move on with his life.
Right.
But it is this traumatizing thing.
Probably want to talk about the scene where he gets abducted in the beginning also, because it is a pretty decent scene when they're all just like leaving the where they were working and stuff. It's nighttime, they're in the forest, and they see something that looks like a wildfire, but it's not quite right. Like, it's not quite the right color.
It's just too red. You know, one thinks is it just like the sunset later than I thought. It's like, no, the sunset that direction like 10 minutes ago. Like, you know, it's not the sun. Yeah, I think what I liked about that as well is that in the setting they're in, there's 6 of them cramped in one little truck. So they don't have a lot of space. They're all kind of getting on each other's nerves. Like, as they're getting closer, they're realizing, oh wait, we're going to like pass through that because there's only one road up here and it's a windy road through the forest. So we're going to encounter whatever this is. We're going to get close to it. And sure enough, Travis is the curious one who like gets out and says, "Look at that!" And there's like, we do see like a floating object. It's not quite a saucer, but it's like a sort of ball.
It's hard to tell because we can see like everything below it, but we can't see what's above it. So we can't see where the light cuts off and above. It just looks like darkness.
Yeah, you can see part of the structure though. You can see like part of like a dome at the bottom, I think, give or take.
Yeah, it's a dome. If a dome had like a disease to it or something, it's very like poxy looking.
Eventually, there's a light that comes down. Your classic sort of light coming down from the spaceship kind of thing. Travis gets thrown back as if he's hit by something.
Yeah, he seems to be frozen like he's in an awkward position where he's like compelled to like look up at it, and then he gets thrown back a ways, like lifted off the ground at an unnatural height and then thrown back, where everyone's like, "Oh crap, this is dangerous. We need to get the hell out of here." And Robert Patrick like doesn't want to go because that's his best friend, maybe future brother-in-law. But I guess he's convinced, like they're all like, he's dead. Just go, so that we don't die too.
But he gives in, and then he feels good. Then when they've driven for like a minute, he stops the truck and says, "We need to go back." And most of them are saying, "No, hell no." There's one religious guy who's saying, "Oh, maybe we should go back. This is the right thing to do." But most of them are like, no, go, get away from that thing. But they do go back. We don't see this part, but we hear that they go back and they just couldn't find him. He's just missing at that point. Whatever was there's gone. Travis is gone.
Although, I had to like, I don't know, like when they all, they probably go up a couple miles before they turn around. So maybe they feel like they're safe, but I would still feel safer in the truck than on like the side of a road in the forest where my friend just got possibly murdered by aliens.
Yeah, it's relatively effective, I think, and there's a lot of smart things that are in there in the script to kind of make this work, in the sense that our main character, I keep saying Robert Patrick, what's his actual name? Mike. So Mike, he like has a talk with his friend Travis when they're on lunch up in the forest, and he basically says like, "I don't really think you're ready to get married. You're still too much of a dreamer." And honestly, his logic here sounds really old-fashioned to me, but it doesn't matter. The point for the movie is that he's effectively disapproving of what Travis wants to do, which is marry his sister, which obviously isn't necessarily something he wants to hear. And they don't get into a fight about it, but it is a little awkward, and it is like this sort of wedge. So the idea that the last conversation he really had with them was this thing where he basically said, "You're not good enough to marry my sister." It adds to this guilt of like, I left him there thinking he was dead, and now he's gone, and if he is dead, the last thing he heard from me really was, "You're not good enough for my sister
to join my family."
Yeah. So,
also, like, if from the perspective of like the investigators, it could be a motive for murder.
Sure, yeah. If you're really looking for a motive, that maybe you could fudge that into one, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I know, and I really like that. There's like I mean, there's kind of some interesting things here about like them going out into the forest to cut down trees and just taking what they want. Like you could argue that kind of parallels the aliens coming down and just taking people that they want without caring.
Totally. Like thinking everything belongs to them, doesn't matter.
There's a little parallel there, I think. And just in the sense that their truck is kind of messy, like the spaceship's kind of. Yeah, not that you see much of the truck, but it doesn't feel like a truck that is cleaned a lot. It feels like a messy, dirty work truck.
No, it feels like like it's a tool.
Yeah. Even when they're cutting trees, there's a scene where the guy Dallas, who doesn't like Travis, he kind of like cuts down a tree that almost hits him, and sort of just jokingly goes, "Oh, timber," like afterwards. Oh, there's like sort of tension and jokes kind of being thrown around in this sort of workplace setting, and they're not really taking the trees. Then obviously trees aren't. I mean, they're alive in the sense that plants are alive, but they're not. It's not quite the same. But I do think there's maybe a little parallel here with how they're treating the trees.
It's funny. I actually just watched a movie called Clear Cut, which is also about just the white man coming into the Canadian forest and just taking down all the trees like they're just a commodity. They're just money, not realizing that this land is sacred to, the Native Americans that are up there. Pretty good horror movie, actually, a horror thriller.
Interesting. But I think those parallels are kind of there, and it just adds a little bit of subtext to what's going on, and a bit of a layer to it. And of course, the other part is the idea of the accusations and like no one believing anything, and understandably so, because in the real world, if someone tells me they're abducted by aliens, it's
a pretty fantastic story.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, it's kind of hard to buy into it, honestly.
It's like if someone told you, everyone in my family died because the house is haunted, you're like, I don't believe you.
You're probably just a mass murderer.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going with. But on some level, because you're watching a movie and you get to experience it with the characters, you're sympathetic to the fact that they did see something fantastical and no one's going to believe them. Yeah. There is something to that, and that's it's interesting. So obviously they're asked to take a lie detector test, and at first he just says, "Well, think about it." They do go to the Dallas guy, who's the one who's kind of the most. He's the bad boy, he's the one that gets angry and yells at people a lot. They convince him to come down for this lie detector test, and it kind of cuts between them as they're all taking this test. Because Dallas's test, because he's anxious, is inconclusive, they wanted to test everyone again, and they get mad and leave. But once they walk out the scene, he does turn to the sheriff and like the other guy and be like, the other 5 results, like they all match. They're all telling the truth. They all believe what they're saying. They're all at comfort saying what they're talking about.
And that is true. That is taken directly from the actual event.
Yeah. Which is interesting, like obviously lie detector tests aren't foolproof, but when you have 5 matching lie detector tests, it's like
well, that's the thing about lie detector tests, is that they don't actually work, but because people believe they work. It's kind of a you can't really use it in a court of law.
Yeah,
but you can use it to get a confession out of people.
You can trick a lie detector test, because if you just sort of are at comfort or peace where you believe what you're saying, if you're good at sort of teaching yourself to do that, then you can basically trick the lie detector test, because as you say, it's the getting agitated that you're telling a lie, or getting nervous that you're telling a lie, that sort of reveals that you're telling a lie. So it's possible to beat it. The movie doesn't really bring that up. That said, though, like these characters that are presented to us in this film don't seem like people who have been trained like Jack Bauer to beat lie detector tests their entire life.
Also, I mean, they all tell a story about a man they knew getting abducted, going missing for 5 days, and then returning, and him saying he got abducted and that's why he was gone.
Yeah, that's a very important detail. The guy comes back and no one really has a good explanation. He doesn't really remember where he was. Obviously, he does remember it eventually, but it does kind of present this like, well, something happened and he was out there without food or water for 5 days, or he was somewhere without food or water for 5 days. It's, well, you know, that's what, this is one of these stories where there's enough juicy details where you sort of go, maybe maybe it's possible. There's just enough there that you got me speculating a little bit.
It's definitely more possible than Ghost.
Sure. It's just, I think that's the part of it. It's like if it was just, you know, 5 people saying this happened and someone went missing, you would probably just be assuming some foul play. But the fact that he showed back up and at no point, certainly not in the movie, maybe in real life, I don't know what happened in real life, but in the movie, at no point does the returning Travis ever once suggest that he was mistreated or anything by the other guys. Like, he never says anything about them that suggests they did something wrong.
I mean, the real guy goes on to write a book about his experience.
Yeah. So. Which, you know, true or not, I don't blame him for milking that. Like, once he became a bit of a celebrity, I don't blame him for, like, turning that into, like, a career.
Better than, being a lumberjack. It's a dangerous job.
Sure, yeah. You get to sit at, you know, a computer and write out a manuscript instead of dodging...
Go on TV and...
dodging logs and stuff.
Go to those UFO conventions and sign autographs.
Yeah, because there's that moment when he's waiting in the car for... his girlfriend, and the kids come up and like want him to sign the newspaper. Do you know what's funny actually? On this, the time period, because it's set in 1975, is because I didn't remember it was based on a true story. Like halfway through the movie, I was thinking, why is this set in 1975? Like this came out in 1993. This could just be 93. There's nothing about it that feels like it needs to be 75.
Honestly, because of the small town, like anywhere between the 50s and the 2000s is all the same time to me. Everything looked the same.
Well, it's the phones. If people have like some form of cell phone, then you can date it past a certain time.
Right. But
before that, because it's all a very specific look of small town working America, it does look quite similar for a long time. I wouldn't say that their hairstyles or their clothes are like particularly... I mean, they look believable enough to be in the 70s, but I wouldn't say they look like this. Like, you could tell me this was 1993 and I would like, yeah, it looks like 1993 too. I
mean, if you added phones, you would say it's a small town in America or Canada now. Like, they just wear flannel and jeans and like working outdoors. They still use chainsaws to cut down trees.
True. It doesn't focus on anything that like dates it. Other than having no phones and to a lesser extent computers.
And maybe everybody gathering around at a church to get their news from the sheriff.
Sure, yeah. I feel that still happens in movies set today, though, that are in small towns. They still do, like, okay, everyone's going to the town meeting to talk about the thing going on, kind of.
Yeah, I guess. You wouldn't get any young people there, but...
Oh, yeah, like, I've never seen evidence of this in real life, but, like, small towns and movies have told me this happens, so...
Yeah, I suppose.
I just roll with it. Maybe it's a trope, but I'll roll with it. I mean, those are the main parts of the movie, I would say. There's little things here or there sort of sprinkled in between all these elements we've talked about. But yeah, those are the main elements. I think I felt very fulfilled by it by the end, and I was kind of into what it was setting up at the start, but as it was getting towards like the back chunk of the movie, I was kind of thinking, oh, this is okay, but maybe not something that... I'm going to remember too fondly. And then that last 10-15 minute chunk hits where it's like, oh no, here's all
of a sudden this movie is elevated.
Here's where all the money went. This is where all the money got spent on this movie.
That's true, because the rest of the stuff is very cheap. You don't have to do anything. It's all it's a drama. For the first hour and a half.
With the slight exception of the abduction scene itself, there is a bit of an effects work going on there, but everything else is just locations in a small town and like houses and churches and trucks and forests. It's all cheap stuff. It's all normal movie, easy to shoot stuff. This at the end, it's like, oh no, you've got sets. You've got a guy on wires or something to make it look like he's floating. You've got outfits, you've got practical like effects that look like
the wire stuff looks great too.
Yeah, and then the practical effects as well of the like the procedures that are happening to him, like those are quite good because they're like, it looks like they're doing stuff to him. It looks like he's got stuff getting into his body.
I like the design of the aliens a lot too.
I like it as a take on the classic Alien. You know, because one of the things that a lot of movies do now is that they try and overcompensate by making them too complicated, and then they just get really dull because they're just a mess of parts. Like, you know, I don't really get anything out of the aliens, and even Independence Day, never mind something newer like, I don't know, like a Cloverfield or so. I mean, that's a bigger monster,
Sure.
but you know.
Yeah, but we have the same complaint with those big monsters. They tend to all look the same.
Because we're both right.
It's true. There's also one moment that I do think is effectively creepy when they first find Travis and like he sees something in the glass and it's just the like fingerprints with some goo coming off of them and the window and stuff, and he's like going to touch it like, I'm not crazy, like something brought me here, you know?
Yeah,
I like that moment a lot.
This is where they dropped him off. Actually, I do have a complaint about this scene. There is something that struck me a little bit weird, is that Robert Patrick calls in this like reporter, or not a reporter, he calls in this investigator who does like UFO stuff, because
Yeah, he's the only one who believes him.
yeah, well, because earlier in the movie there is one reporter who wants to talk to him about aliens, and he sort of tells him to piss off. But then there's this guy who gives him a card and says like, we investigate this sort of stuff. But when he shows up with his like colleague right here, I thought he was going to call the sheriff and that to say, hey, he's back, right? Mm-hmm. He's not dead, he's back, we found him, come and help us, get an ambulance, whatever. But instead he calls these goons, which I'll accept that part to a point. But they're trapped in this little tiny bathroom. That's this little public bathroom that they're in. These two guys come in and he's got a mic and he wants to like interview him right there when he's not even said anything yet, really, because he's too in shock, he's too scared.
No, and they're using like the old-timey photographers with like the you know what I mean, cameras with like the big
flashbulb
flash on it. So yeah, it's obviously quite dramatic for him.
And they're shoving this like mic in his face and he's asking him questions. Travis's brother, who's like a small part in the movie, he's there, he's yelling, you know, Mike, stop this, Mike, like this, let get him to a hospital. The girlfriend, Mike's sister, is like, no, let's stop this. And for some reason, eventually Robert Patrick does actually eventually say, okay, you've tried it, it's not working, let's get him to hospital. But there's a good like minute of this scene where he's like, no, give them a chance, and I'm like, why? what reason do you have here to give them a chance right now? This is not the time for this.
The only thing I can imagine is that he took them seriously because they took him seriously. So maybe he thought like they would be the experts in this situation.
But they come off as just complete hokey.
They come off, they come off as a bunch of cranks.
Yeah, they come off as like these days they'd have a message board and they'd have like a Reddit group and like, we investigate paranormal shit. We have a podcast.
Podcasters.
I know.
The scum of the world.
I mean, let's face it, most movies these days that have a podcaster character, I usually don't like that character.
Or they're set up to be murdered.
And
by Leatherface.
I realize the reason for that is, you know, or the irony of that, I should say, is not lost on me.
Yeah.
But we do a movie podcast. We're not doing like true crime podcasts, and you know, we're not trying to like talk to Michael Myers.
We're not successful.
Yet.
That's right.
Yet.
Travis, if you're still around, we'd love to interview you.
Yeah, we'll interview you.
We'll even read your book.
Yeah, it was funny actually because obviously they did stuff to him physically that I thought, oh, is there going to be like a little moment at the end where his like 2-year-old son's going to like have like a glowing eye or something? Like the idea that his body, like they put something in him and now his son's going to be like half alien or something.
Just have a really big forehead.
Oh, just start speaking Klingon out of nowhere. It's like, whoa, that's weird. Where did you pick that
awesome.
up? Honestly, it's a pretty solid movie. It's not overly long either. I think it builds in the normal mystery of it and the effect on the characters that when it does give you that big payoff, it does feel like a payoff, and it does honestly feel really creepy and well directed. I think him's creeping about floating around that ship looking for anywhere to go when, like, if he runs into these aliens, he can't fight them. He's not going to be able to do anything. This is their home.
No, he's so out of his element.
Yeah, it's their home. It's their technology. He doesn't know his way around, and he's floating, which implies that they're in space right now. So even if he does somehow take control and like maybe is able to fight a couple aliens off, what's he going to do? Land the ship? Like, he can't do anything.
He does knock the helmet off one of them.
He does. But you know, it's not like he knows how to control the beam to send them back down to Earth or anything.
Yeah, and like using gravity. Like, they seem to be fine. They can walk around on the ship, but he's floating the whole time. So
Mag boots.
like they have well, they're naked, and they look to be naked anyway. So it just looks like this whole thing is like a controlled atmosphere to keep him submissive.
Or maybe it's not less of a control thing. Maybe it's just that the gravity they're used to is so different from ours that, like, it's so much lower than Earth's that we'd be floating in their gravity because whereas they're like more dense.
Maybe they have sticky feet.
Or yeah, maybe they just have sticky feet. I mean, that's possible. Or I mean, you said earlier on that there was like tech built into like the material on the pod. Maybe they just put like a mag boot tech into their feet. Maybe they just like put it straight in there.
It seems convenient. Yeah.
They're like a cybernetic species. They put in like tech into their body and stuff.
You know, if there's going to be another alien abduction movie, I mean, they have a high bar to reach when it comes to, like, if you're going to make it a thriller scene, to do something better than this.
Yeah. You know what? It may be almost a one scene movie, but that one scene is pretty great, and it's
so worth it.
And the rest of the movie's not bad. The rest of the movie, you know, gets us to the line, but that's what puts it over the line, and you know, so I would recommend it. I would recommend checking it out, and I had a good time, and I'm glad I bought this one because I probably will watch it again at some point. So.
Oh, you bought it? Cool. It was on Hulu.
It was on sale. In fact, if I recall correctly, when it was on sale like a month ago, I said, "Hey, this is on sale. Do you think we'll do it soon?" And you said, "Yeah, let's do it." And then I bought it. That was how that conversation went.
That sounds right.
So here we are, and then we came up with the 90s alien theme, and all of a sudden I had a place to live. So there you go. We can rate the film. Tara, what are you going to rate Fire in the Sky out of 10?
You know, I was thinking 6.5, but honestly, after our discussion, it is a really good movie, and that scene does elevate the film to a 7, I think. So I'm going to go straight 7.
Okay. I think I may even nudge up a little bit from that and go say 7.5. I'm not going to go 8 because I do think the rest of it is a bit more B movie tier, and then it's really elevated by that one scene. So I think because of that, I can't go into great, but I think I'll give it an enthusiastic 7.5. I really had a good time with it. So there you go. So yeah, I'm going to make Tara pose for the thumbnail at this point in time. So
I don't know why I always forget that you're going to ask me this. Always.
It's like an alien abduction. I've made you forget the trauma, and then every time I get to spring it on you. All right, 3, 2, 1, pause. All right, okay. It was much better.
That's my best Travis.
I mean, the last time was he smiled and put a thumb up, and it was like you had nothing for that. So I'm glad. Yeah. I'm glad you had some inspiration for this one.
I have nothing every time.
I will take this time to thank our Patreon producers for the month. So thank you very much to Tyler Hess, Cindy Palacios, David Short, Bordnow, Christopher Moy, David Brown, Al Treisman, and Alison M. Fordyce. Thank you all to our Patreon producers. But you can support us for as little as $1 per month, can't they, Tara?
That's right, Peter. If you enjoy our reviews, please check out our Patreon page. It's patreon.com/MildFuzzTV. And for as little as $1 per month, you will get access to bonus movies for the Ace. You get to check out our reviews for cinematic classic masterpieces like You're the Hunter from the Future, which has the greatest theme song ever made. And some other junk.
Is the man.
And if you donate $5 per month, you will get access to votes for what we watch every month. We're doing a 90s vote for
That's
this
a good
one.
point. I actually don't know what our third movie is yet because it's the vote winner. That's the third one.
Oh, that's right.
And we're a little bit ahead in recording, so like those votes just went up at the time of recording. So
yeah.
So we'll see.
So this month you've already missed it probably, but there is going to be a 90s alien vote. And then
well, you definitely have missed it because this will be up in April and the vote ends.
Who knows what May will bring. But if you want to put your voice in it, there'll be a vote for you.
Plus you
get access to these reviews a day early.
That's what I was just going to add on. I thought you forgot about it, but good job.
Thank you.
So there you go. There's the plugging. And that is the show. That is the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Hopefully you've been enjoying these more, if you're watching the video versions anyway, the more edited form that they're taking, and enjoying the extra razzle dazzle. If you listen to the audio versions, you're basically not noticing anything different, I imagine. But I'm putting more work in, so
they look good.
Just appreciate it, I guess. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. It is always a pleasure taking you to space and back.
Mm-hmm.
That was odd.
I'm glad he didn't talk about the anal probe in this.
Who? Travis? All right. I thought you meant me. I was like, why would I bring up the anal probe? There was no anal probe. Unless that happened, like maybe it was too traumatic and he woke up just as the memory was going to get too traumatic. He woke up.
Maybe there was no way to do it in the movie where people would take it seriously.
True. Although,
because then it would become guys, don't purr into the microphone.
What if like that table he was strapped on like had it then turned around? Like what if it spun? And then his ass was just in the air.
And that's where it ended.
Yeah.
It's the same scene as the eyeball, just reverse.
Dear.
Still pretty traumatic, actually. It's a nightmare.
I mean, let's face it, all of this is a violation of some sorts. It's just... I mean...
Great movie, yeah.
Anyway, there you go. That is the movie. That's Fire in the Sky. Thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer ad salsa.